Okay, we're going to get started. Steve, could you go to the next slide for me? Thank you. So, hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This topic is post-harvest products contribute to a more sustainable floral industry. As I mentioned, I'm Georgina Sampat. I'm FloraLife's Global Marketing Coordinator, and today's presenter is Steve Daum. Steve is our Director of Superflor Technologies, and he has over 30 years of experience in the floral industry. And he has extensive hands-on and theoretical knowledge, so he's one of the wise men to listen to in the floral industry. If you were part of last month's webinar, you'll remember it was also a sustainability topic. It was on what sustainability is and what it means for the floral industry. We recorded that webinar for anyone who missed it or wants to see it again. It's on our YouTube channel, so definitely go over to youtube.com/FloraLife and check out that webinar if you're interested. The reason for today's webinar is that there are millions of stems being scrapped every year, and it's very costly for the business, but also for the planet. And so Steve is here today to tell us what we can do to be more sustainable when it comes to that in the floral industry. So in the meantime, if you have questions, please use your chat function, send me your questions, and at the end, we're going to try and answer as many as we can. Besides that, I'd say enjoy the presentation. Take it away, Steve.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I want to thank somebody who works for us. His name is Mark Allen. Mark has educated himself and now educated our team in what sustainability is and hopefully our role in it. And this version of this, he's helped us develop this. So I want you to know we have stolen quite a bit from his knowledge base. So when we look at sustainability, we recognize quite a few things. Very commonly, people talk about packaging, fuel savings, water conservation, all these things, which are very important. There's no doubt about that. But if you roll all of that up into one aspect, the low-hanging fruit, or the one that really is becomes the most immediately sustainable, is shrink. What that means is product that actually is worked through the channel and ends up in the trash. All of that actually becomes a hugely sustainable burden on our industry and others. So what we've done here is we've done a little bit of some artwork, and thanks to our marketing department, because it looks great, I think. And I'll give you a real quick version of this before we launch out. This is one of the channels. This one, for example, is the Superflor, which is a supermarket channel, which we know is growing globally and probably part, hopefully, of your marketplace in some way, shape, or form. So to give an example of this, if you look at the first 3 slides up there, you'll notice immediately, like slide number 3 is watering. So there's water conservation occurring. There is actually labor with maybe the harvesting or the breeding aspect of it. Once the flowers are harvested, like for example, on slides 4 to 5, we have post-harvest. Obviously the water conservation there, and we'll explain a little bit about our role in that. And then of course the packaging, the sleeves, the flower food sachet, which you all are aware we play a role in. And then, of course, the transportation within the growing country to whatever port it may be. In the case of this example, these are our friends in Colombia, which are transporting the products to an airport. This easily could be also an ocean port these days, but let's just use the airport example. Of course, then there's the flight to Miami, which is a quick 3-hour, 10-minute flight from Bogota, for example, or 3:30 from Quito. And then there is also labor we have to keep thinking about, which is also we have to be sustainable with. And then there's the effort and the labor of clearing the product. Of course, the cooling can never be forgotten. The cost of cooling is high, and it has to be kept throughout the full channel. The cold chain is one of the things that we have to think about sustainably. And then, of course, once the product enters the US, there has to be a transportation to the marketplace. In many cases, in this channel, there's a rehydration which once again, we go back into the water conservation. The flower has to be rehydrated, and then it may be transported into a distribution center. That's what the DC stands for in slide C. And then finally, there's a movement to the actual supermarket where the end consumer meets the product. So all of that labor, the packaging exists in this channel. And of course, if at any one time the product isn't treated properly in all of these steps, it ends up in the trash, and imagine the waste there. We could also see this in other channels. This is an example, similar channel, but notice how this goes through a retail floral shop, or it ends up in a wholesaler. And the wholesaler, of course, then will distribute it to either a retailer or a, we call them a function or party people, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of things happening there in that last step. But notice it's similar, the labor, the packaging. So having understood that, we want to make sure that we understand the lowest hanging fruit in order to become sustainable by far is mishandling it in these channels or in these steps that make a flower end up in the dump and all of the waste that goes to it. So let's look down a little bit on the next possible and reasons, and we'll see where we can assure that this doesn't happen. So some of the basics, of course, with flowers, we all understand, as we mentioned, the cold chain, for example, but also we need to think about flower care. Depending on what role we're playing, as we pass it off in the channel, we need to make sure we play our role properly. And not only sustainably, but also that we do the protocols that are set into the industry to assure that when we pass it off to the next step, it is passed off and we have a viable, sellable, enjoyable product for the end consumer. Obviously, we want to reduce waste as a goal and keep that quality there. It's funny how the waste and the quality really become one issue, because if the quality is not there, it is waste. And if it is waste, we become unsustainable to this channel. Obviously, profits, we all understand the fact that quality is very tied to profits. A high quality flower sells well, and hopefully is what the consumer is looking for. And we're aware of that. So when you boil down to it in the basics, we have the 3 C's: cold, clean, and care. And the industry has kind of embraced this globally, that they probably pay a third, and a third for the responsibility. It's interesting to recognize this, that no matter where in the channel you are, these 3 C's play a role. Hate to keep reiterating something, but the cold chain is everywhere. Of course, the cleanliness, and we'll go over some of these points, is surprisingly, we're going to touch on some bases that maybe some things you haven't thought of. And of course, the care of the product becomes a very, very important thing to assure the product ends up on someone's table being enjoyed for those 7 to 10 days the consumer expects. All right, let's talk about cold. Understand, and maybe you haven't thought of it this way, but it's a good way to look at it. Understand a flower only has so many breaths. We're all doing it right now. I'm doing it probably a lot faster to you because I'm a little nervous about what I'm doing here. But the intake of oxygen, the breathing out of carbon dioxide, if you put your hand in front of that breath, you'll notice you'll feel some heat and you'll feel some moisture. That respiration rate, you only get so many breaths. I don't mean to be sad about this, but this is true for us too. Let's not worry about that now. But let's think about it on the flower. The flower only has so many respiration moves. Unlike us, the flower really, this respiration speed is dictated by the temperature at which the flower is. It's surprising to some people, but flowers don't have lungs and stomachs and stuff, but they do have respiration as part of keeping them alive. And let's not forget, the goal of the flower is to move to become a seed. We try to keep the flower, in the flowering state. Those are the 7 to 10 days. Once the flower moves into the seed state, it's not so attractive. Very beneficial to the world, but not so attractive. So let's understand a real basic point. I want to mention it because we can't really do a seminar without mentioning it. The proper storage temperature for most flowers is 34 to 38, or as you can see there, 1.1 to 3.3 C. Some flowers are tropical, would require a little higher level. Relative humidity, ideally 75 to 85%, but the temperature becomes that really a predominant issue. Other things that the cold offer us is protection for some fungal bacterial growth. And we also need to be aware that this temperature adherence has to be part of the protocol and needs to always be kept in check. And once again, there's a cost to keeping temperature low, but when done correctly, the value of it, the quality of the flower continues. Simple study done. I believe this was done at University of Florida, and also probably several others. But we have stolen the information or borrowed it as an industry. What we would call really, it's everybody can share it. Notice the chart on the left: the number of vase life days and the temperature at which the flowers are. Obviously, the lower the temperature in the storage period, basically, the greater the number of days the flower lasts. Please remember, some flowers like tropicals do require a little higher temperature. There's an old saying, nothing, picture speaks 1,000 words. In this photograph here, you'll notice these flowers were stored at the temperature below for 5 days. And then they were brought out into a room for observation. This is day 5 of that observation. So if we look at the snapdragon on the left, if you look on the one on the far right, notice that that flower, in theory, has been into a rotation of 10 days, 5 in a cooler at 55 degrees, and now 5 in an observation room at 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Notice how the florets are gone, and the one next to it as well at 50, the florets are gone. You know why this is? Because ethylene was activated at those high temperatures and they have upsized, or the petals have been literally fallen off. So really, if you look at this picture, you could really understand where one flower is viable, usable, and the other one is trash. And once again, you could start to understand the sustainability of flowers kept at the wrong temperature and how they become unsustainable and they become trash to the industry. Botrytis, a catch-all word that we use in the industry to catch really all fungal bacterial issues. But let's talk about it because it is part of the second C, clean. Botrytis is a fungal bacterial blight, whatever you want to call it, is one of the major reasons why when things aren't kept either correctly or clean or temperature fluctuations, flowers become trash and unsustainable. And the other one, of course, is the direct relationship between botrytis and the production of ethylene. Commonly known or little known, depending, of the number one producer of ethylene is decaying product. And when something like botrytis takes into effect, it generates quite a bit of ethylene, and it causes damages like you see on the left. It causes abscission of the petals, obviously discoloration of the petals, and I don't think anybody appreciates botrytis growing on a flower. There are several tools in the industry out there that protect the flower as it moves through the channel, whether it moves through a distribution center with high ethylene levels. And in our world, we sell a product called Ethylblock. Ethylblock actually treats the flower. It is a molecule which blocks the ethylene site on the flower, and it allows the flower to move through the channel, and the flower doesn't sense the ethylene even when it's present. So it's a great tool, and it's one of those things that help the flower move through and make sure that the customer gets what they're expecting. So the clean aspect of this, we have to think about where and what is touching the flower, because as the flower becomes less and less sanitary, we start losing that vase life and it becomes less and less sustainable. So bacteria is everywhere. No matter where the flower moves, even on the surface of the flower itself, there's fungal bacterial spores. though I guess the word ubiquitous becomes common, but I like to think of it as bacteria is everywhere. And if you let it take control, it will take control. So some very obvious things like buckets, countertops, cutters, knives, the actual cooler themselves, or the truck that is transporting the flowers, all become very important. And we need to have a regimen or a protocol in assuring, especially prior to a holiday like we have coming up soon, that those facilities, that equipment, those buckets and cutters are ready and clean and are not only transporting the flowers, but transporting fungus and bacteria from one flower to the other. So we need to look into what tools do we use in the industry, and why should we or could we use them? Once again, in order to make sure that the flower stays viable and doesn't become part of that trash pile. So we need to understand, for example, in something as simple as the water which the flowers are absorbing, if you want to call it that, taking it up. And if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you'll notice the clarity of the water kind of shows you already how bacteria and fungus form. Believe it or not, there is a little take-home thing here. There's a thing called a CFU, a colony forming unit. Bacteria kind of grows by colonies. And if the colony count is kept low, the bacteria has a hard time establishing itself. So I'm an old guy, but a long time ago, there was a commercial where two friends told two friends who told two friends. And this cascade, this growth is kind of, it gives a good example of how bacteria and fungus multiply. It multiplies by huge mass. If we can keep that fungal bacterial count down, we assure it doesn't grab hold, and we keep the water clean, and we keep the flower hydrated. And once the flower continues to be hydrated, it continues to develop properly. And once again, give that consumer what they're expecting. If the bacteria takes hold, it steals away that vase life. Give you an idea, there's electron microscope photographs here on the right-hand side. This is the inside of a vascular system, or the plumbing system inside of the stem. And the second picture in the middle there is what the stem or the vascular system should look like. The one on top shows that fungus and bacteria setting up shop, multiplying, preventing the movement of all important nutrients and water up the stem. And then, of course, the result is that rose down there at the bottom, which we all can agree is not only unsustainable, but hideous in the trash pile. So we need to keep that sanitation and all those things we mentioned present and always in mind. Some of the tools that can be used in that, we actually have a cleaner, which is called DCD, and it stands for disinfect, clean, and deodorize. This is a hospital-grade quaternary ammonium. And reason I mention that is not only to impress you, but to understand that it has one really big benefit over things like bleach, and that is residual activity. So if we all recognize what bleach is, we know bleach kills fungus and bacteria pretty effectively, and we don't disagree with you. It sure does. And it also kills flowers if used improperly. But moving on from that, we know that bleach has an odor, a strong odor. And when the odor is present, we know the bleach is doing what we want it to do, which is killing fungus and bacteria. Unfortunately, when the odor goes away, so does the effectivity of what we're expecting from it. Where when you deal with things that have a quat or quaternary ammonium, that residual benefit exists. So there should be a use of a quat in your program in order to assure that it leaves a residual benefit. So when you leave the tabletop, the countertop, the bucket, the cooler wall, whatever, you have something left behind there, assuring that a colony doesn't start to form the minute you walk away, if you would. Give you a quick example. This is a study done basically cleaning a bucket. Obviously, yes, it does promote the use of TCD, but think about the quat, which is the active ingredient we're looking at here. And notice that over a small period of time, once the odor of Clorox goes away, it loses that ability to check back the bacteria. Okay. Next step is the care. We know that handling the product from post-harvest all the way through to that rehydration to present to the customer is what we would call care. Flowers not only need water, but they need food. Remember how we mentioned how the respiration that we're doing and the flowers are doing at the same time? Well, if you put your hand in front of your mouth and you feel that respiration, that heat that comes off is us burning carbohydrates, or in the case of maybe the fact that I'm a little belly gut here, it shows me maybe proteins, whatever. What I'm trying to say is the flower is also respirating, and the flower also needs those carbohydrates. So the care not only includes water, but it includes basically a use of food source. And that is where the flower food comes in. Also, the flower food also has a water clarifier, assuring that the water keeps moving up the stem, and it prevents any of that fungal bacterial issues that we're talking about. So measure your food correctly. It is very important that the measurement of the flower food that you use is important, that you do it correctly. Read the instructions, please. You don't want to under or overuse anything. And of course, just as important, I mean, you could use a dosing system, an injector, if you're using large volumes. If not, have some sort of system, whether you have a stage amount, put a line on your bucket, something as simple as pouring a gallon of water into a bucket, making the line, and then you know exactly how much flower food goes in each bucket. That is a pretty full way of doing it if you're not using large volumes. And pass the education on. As the consumer goes to use it, let him know the importance of using the flower food and using it at the right rates. It'll definitely help them enjoy those 7 to 10 days that they're looking for. So the hydration point, or the hydrating 100 as we call it, is the first step in this hydration. And that is the post-harvest. As the flowers come in off the field, we need to assure and prepare the flower for its movement through the channel. As we remember, we started, for example, in the demonstration, we started these in Colombia or Ecuador or wherever it may be. We want to make sure the flowers are prepared to go through this trip and to end up on the other side in great condition in order to rehydrate and assure that they do not become part of the trash pile or the unsustainable pile, as we want to call it. So we want to make sure we have high water quality, clean, free of fungus and bacteria. We want to make sure that we keep the temperature down on all the solutions. The temperature of the water should be room or chilled. In the case of large growers, they will chill the water. And this leads to a much more consistent hydration. And we also want to make sure that we use the proper solutions in order to occur this hydration. In our world, we have the HydroFlor 100 as part of this program. And it basically assures that the vascular system is prepared not only to hydrate the flower prior to shipping, but it prepares the flower to rehydrate upon arrival of its marketplace. So depending on the flower type, there may be different procedures. There may be use of thiosulfate. There may be other kind of chemistry, but this is a good example of our 100 step, or our first step. Here again, proper mixing and adherence to all protocols are important. The next step is the 200 step. The 200 step would be the rehydration. The rehydration would mean the flower now is in a marketplace. So let's say at a bouquet maker in the supermarket channel, or at a wholesaler in the retail supply channel. We need to make sure the flowers rehydrate. Here, once again, we're adhering to the temperature protocols. We don't want the flower to waste any of those very important respirations. We want to make sure that the flowers hydrate. We don't want to overfeed them. We want to just hydrate them because we want that development to occur in the consumer's home. We really shouldn't be enjoying the development of the flowers in our coolers. That belongs to the customer. So once again, we need to make sure that we hydrate things properly. In our world, we have the new technology, the Express Clear. These are solutions which do take into consideration all the components. And basically, we want to keep the flower from opening, but we do want to make sure that it hydrates. All right. We do have a couple of items like Quick Dip, which I think for those of you in the industry for a long time use it, and it takes our knowledge to a little bit of a different level. It's and it saves some time, and it also is a great saver of product that may end up in that trash. It's one of those items that the industry has taken to globally pretty well, and basically you just cut the stem in the case of Quick Dip, and you dip it in Quick Dip for a few seconds, and then you place it in that 200 solution, and the flower rehydrates. I'm not here to tell you that it's going to take away any damage that's already occurred on the flower, but it definitely keeps flowers out of that trash pile and again, more sustainable. So look into it. If you haven't tried it, it's a great way to save the day, if you would. The next step is the educational point, but we need to obviously mention it, and that is the feeding, or the 300 step. The 300 step many times occurs maybe at the wedding or at the party, and definitely at the consumer's home. And this is where we definitely want to introduce the maximum amount of carbohydrates, or as it says here, sugar load. But we want to make sure the flower has what it needs in order to develop, to colorize. For those flowers that still offer a scent, we want to make sure that the flower has the food, if you would, in order to generate that scent. And of course, it also, we want to make sure in order to generate or to assure that vase life. We definitely recognize whenever you use a foam arrangement, that this type of solution should be present in there, because the flowers are absorbing or taking up that solution within the foam. And really, it optimizes the vase life and the coloration and all of that. You will find this technology in the little sachets that we promote, and hopefully that you are using. That is the 300, and that is the product that you will find in that. I think the most important thing here when we look at a sustainable issue is passing on that knowledge. When you come at the few interactions that we have with consumers, we definitely need to pass on that knowledge. We want to let them know why they should be using the flower food and using it correctly to the right amount of water. Many of my customers in the supermarket industry, and they may not only offer one with the bouquet, but then at store level, people will say, can I have an extra one? Because I want to use it again when I refill the vase as the flower absorbs the initial liter, let's say. And I think these are important things. And as part of enjoying the flowers, people like to see the flowers do something. Very frequently, when people get a dozen roses or a bouquet of flowers, the next day you'll ask them how are the flowers, and they'll use their hands to show the flowers opening or developing. People want their flowers to do something. Yes, roses may be sold at stage 2 or 3, but without a doubt, 7 days later, we want the roses opened at stage 4, and the idea of a stage 5, even where the flowers are wide open and they've all developed. And the joy, people say, my God, you should see how those flowers opened. I guess the real one that everybody always thinks about is the peonies, how the peonies arrives looking very small, and then 5 days later, it's you almost thinking, God, they're not going to fit in the vase. And we see that on a successful bouquet where flowers not only take on beautiful size, but also beautiful coloration. So the importance of that is we want to make sure the flowers do have the food and the technology, and I think you could offer that for them. There are some industry tricks of the trade which assure flowers to go through a very difficult situation, whether it be an outdoor wedding, for example, or an outdoor party. The use of anti-transpirants or products like these, just one of those industry things that assure that the flowers can actually put up with the stress that our industry sometimes puts on things. A very warm day, a very sunny situation, something that will prevent the flower from obviously, I would say ripening too quickly. So you're all aware that those tricks of the trade, and these are 2 examples of the ones that we offer. So let's remember, as a wrap up, the 3 C's and the role that we play in it. The cold chain, we can never forget it. It's most important, and there's definitely a cost to it. But once you've invested in the cold chain, we want to make sure the flower moves forward. The cleaning, the use of a proper protocol for buckets, trucks, clippers, tabletops, et cetera, et cetera. We want to make sure that we are following that protocol, and the use of possibly a quaternary ammonium in that protocol to assure that hospital grade quat is being used and it leaves that all beneficial, basically residual benefit as the facilities that we use and the flowers move. And then, of course, care. We want to make sure we're using the right technology at the right time during the post-harvest hydration, the rehydration at the second step, and of course, we're passing on the knowledge for that 300 step to the consumer to make sure they understand their role. So as they play with the flowers, they enjoy it and they see what they have put into it. Once you educate somebody and they understand their role in the success, they will enjoy it. And it becomes really part of their care, and hopefully they'll look forward to doing it the next time. Well, that concludes my portion, and I want to thank you, and hopefully, Gio, are you there to pick up the ball from here?
Yes, thank you, Steve. That was really interesting.